We are live waiting for the final vote for Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson to be elevated as the first Black woman in history to the Supreme Court. We're going to take you now to the Senate floor as we wait to hear the vote.
He marched alongside of the NAACP Detroit president, Edward Turner, in support of civil rights. That same year, when Dr. Martin Luther King organized a march in Detroit, Governor George Romney declared the occasion Freedom Day in Michigan. To my colleague, Senator Mitt Romney, you are your father's son. This week marks 54 years since a shot rang out in Memphis, Tennessee, claiming the life of Dr. Martin Luther King, an American who spoke with greater moral clarity than nearly any other in our history. The night before he died, Dr. King spoke at a rally in support of the city's striking sanitation workers. There was tension in the air. From the moment he set foot in Memphis, he'd received a barrage of death threats. And as Dr. King spoke to the crowd at the Mason Temple, death was on his mind. He said, like anybody, I'd like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will, and he's allowed me to go up to the mountain. His next words proved prophetic. Dr. King said, I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. Ricky Jones said that she thought about Dr. King's prophecy when she realized the Judiciary Committee was voting on Judge Jackson's nomination on the anniversary of Dr. King's death. It felt like the prophecy had come to pass. Dr. King didn't make it to the promised land, but Judge Jackson's ascension to the Supreme Court brings us closer to that longed-for place. I'd like to close with one last personal plea to my Senate colleagues. I hope you'll think about this. In the years to come, long after we've left the Senate, one of our grandchildren may ask where we were on this historic day, April 7th, 2022, when America broke down what seemed like an impossible racial barrier and voted to send the first African-American woman to serve on our highest court. I will be proud to say I was on the Senate floor, standing at my desk and casting my vote with pride for the next Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. I hope my colleagues will join me in sharing this historic moment. And I yield the floor. The absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll. Ms. Baldwin.
They're preparing. Not quite sure if someone else is going to speak. That was the chair, Dick Durbin, speaking. There's a quorum call now just to make sure that everyone is in attendance. 50 Republicans and 50 Democrats. Of course, 3 Republicans, Susan Murkowski, Lisa Collins, and Mitt Romney have all said that they were going to vote yes on Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, which would bring the count to 53 to 47. It's just a simple majority needed for confirmation. And so we await official word, which is supposed to come within the next 10 minutes or so. Right now is a quorum call on the Senate floor. We understand that the Congressional Black Caucus, all 50, I think it's 58 members now, all 58 members of the Congressional Black Caucus is watching as well. They have come to the Senate to watch this historic moment. Vice President Kamala Harris is said to be either there in the room or on her way to watch as the historic vote takes place. So history is being made, and let it be known, of course, is bringing it to you live. We certainly look forward to the vote like everyone else. We've heard everyone's thoughts on this over the last few weeks. We saw what the judge went through a couple of weeks ago when the confirmation hearings kicked off. A lot of antagonistic, to say the least, behavior going on in the at the Hart Building at the time. And so it all comes down to this: Ketanji Brown Jackson, the D.C. Circuit Judge, who was voted and confirmed last year for her current role by a bipartisan vote that included folks like Lindsey Graham, who now has changed his vote less than a year later. So we know that these things are now strictly about what side of the aisle you sit on. It's not about credentials. It's not about whether you're qualified. It's about what party you are in. Because again, everyone
Republican leader, we
agrees
are
that
in
Judge
call.
Brown Jackson
Further
is
proceedings on the
immensely
forum call, please.
qualified.
That's right.
Without objection.
President Biden
Mitt
was
Romney,
elected
the
on the
Senate
promise
Majority Leader.
that he would govern as a moderate and unite the country. He insisted the radical left would not be calling the shots.
Please. Senator will commence.
He insisted the radical left would not be calling the shots on his watch. But when it came to one of the most consequential decisions a president can make, a lifetime appointment to our highest court, the Biden administration let the radicals run the show. With Washington Democrats in power, the far left got the reckless inflationary spending they wanted. The far left has gotten the insecure border they wanted. And today, the far left will get the Supreme Court justice they wanted. The fringe activists who demand partisan court packing, attack the justices, and describe our Constitution as trash made up their minds from the start of this administration. If a Supreme Court vacancy should arise, they wanted one nominee and one nominee only, Judge Jackson. They spent dark money to promote this person specifically. They pushed her for the D.C. Circuit. Then they badgered Justice Breyer to quit. In February, one of these groups announced Judge Jackson would be the nominee before President Biden actually did make the announcement. So think about that for a moment. The Senate has examined Judge Jackson's qualifications with the seriousness and vigor that a lifetime appointment deserves. Unlike when the party's positions are reversed, the country was not subjected to uncorroborated smear campaigns, committee boycotts, stunts with cardboard cutouts, or mobs chasing senators around the Capitol. Now, a few of our Democratic colleagues seem to have decided in advance they would claim that Judge Jackson was treated shabbily. I've heard that script recited, even though it didn't happen. Didn't happen. Let's be clear. No nominee before the Senate for any position deserves a cakewalk or a coronation. Tough questions about a federal judge's own rulings and statements are the definition of fair game. My Republican colleagues vigorously inquired, shed important new light on a frequently disturbing judicial record. So I applaud my colleagues for focusing on substance and not following the Democrats' recent precedents into the gutter. Unfortunately, what the Senate's process turned up was disturbing. First, the nominee would not follow the Ginsburg-Breyer precedent and denounced the insane concept of partisan court packing. Second, her judicial record is full of cases where Judge Jackson ruled like a policymaker implementing personal biases instead of a judge following the text wherever it led. And third, her aggressive judicial activism frequently focused on treating convicted criminals as gently as possible, in literally case after case, from deadly fentanyl to open borders to child exploitation. Judge Jackson tilted the scales of justice away from public safety and innocent victims in favor of her career-long passion for softening up criminal sentencing. In Judge Jackson's courtroom, plain legal text and clear congressional intent were no match for what the judge admits are her personal policy disagreements. Even as a violent crime wave sweeps America, Democrats are pursuing a nationwide campaign to make the justice system softer on crime. They're stacking the deck with far-left prosecutors, woke warriors at the Department of Justice, and federal judges who believe criminals deserve lighter treatment. This project is terrible for innocent American families. And every piece of evidence suggests Democrats view Judge Jackson.
It's just incredible when you listen to Mitch McConnell
I'll close with this.
talk about what he's
These
just.
debates about judicial philosophy are not just academic. The charged political atmosphere around confirmations, the outsized role that unelected judges play in our national life, these are direct consequences of liberal judicial activism. They're direct results of the efforts to misuse federal courts as a progressive legislature that voters can't kick out. A republic of self-serving citizens should not spend every June watching with bated breath to see if 5 or 6 lawyers will hand down sweeping policy changes with zero basis in the written Constitution. And the solution is not to make the court even more of a super legislature like liberals want, a delegitimizing death spiral that would destroy the rule of law. There's only one solution. The Senate should only confirm justices who will follow the text of our laws and our Constitution wherever it leads, who will leave subjective policy judgments on this side of the street where they belong. That's how we lower the temperature. That's how we shore up the courts. That's how we protect the rule of law. Staff the judiciary with brilliant men and women who understand and embrace this limited role. No other road leads anywhere good for our great nation.
This is an incredible speech filled with obvious hypocrisy. This is an individual who made sure that former President Barack Obama's Supreme Court pick did not go through, didn't even come to a hearing. This is the same individual who stacked the court with former President Trump's nominees, even as the election for president was about to take place in an unprecedented fashion. No confirmation had ever took place so close to election day as they put through Amy Coney Barrett.
Mr. President,
here is
this is
Chuck
a
Schumer,
wonderful day, a joyous day, an inspiring day for the Senate, for the Supreme Court, and for the United States of America. Today, we are here to vote to confirm Ketanji Brown Jackson as the 116th Justice of the United States Supreme Court. Now, a few days ago, I spoke with a group of 8th graders from Cheektowaga, New York. Many of them were students of color. It was amazing. When I mentioned that this week we were confirming the judge, you could see them light up, the unmistakable look in their eyes. One day, each young lady thought to herself, I can do it too. You know, it's been people getting sick and dying, many of whom we knew, stores closing, schools shutting their doors. But even in the darkest times, there are bright lights. Today is one of the brightest lights, and let us hope it's a metaphor, an indication of many more bright lights to come. As I've said over and over again, there are 3 words that I think best fit Judge Jackson: brilliant, beloved, belongs. Judge Jackson is in every sense and by all measures a brilliant jurist. She is indeed a brilliant person. By the judge's own telling, she first discovered her calling to the law, not in a classroom or by reading a book or by talking to lawyers, but by sitting at the kitchen table next to her dad, filling out her coloring book while her dad poured through case law. Years from now, other parents and other daughters will do the same, and it will be Justice Jackson's opinions that will lay open on the table. The judge's parents, her entire family, should beam with pride that this day has come. At every step of her upbringing and career, Ketanji Brown Jackson ranked among the highest of achievers. And look, we should take a moment to note that Judge Jackson will be the first and only justice with experience as a public defender. We're proud of that, and America is proud of that. It will enhance the court's ability to preserve a basic truth in our country, that all deserve equal justice under the law, from the privileged to the impoverished. In an imperfect world, the judge conquered so many hurdles, and today stands as one of the most experienced individuals ever nominated to the Supreme Court. For this reason, the judge is also beloved by individuals and organizations across the political spectrum. I went through her record carefully, and never did I find one instance of a peer or colleague or associate say one negative word about her. It was incredible. When we go through these records, you often find someone here and there who will badmouth the individual who knew them. Not with just Judge Jackson. And lest we forget, the judge is popular in the minds of the American people. A Gallup poll released after her hearing showed nearly 60% of the public supports her confirmation, 10 points above the historical norm. And there is no question here, the country by and large wants the Senate to confirm Judge Jackson. Police chiefs want to confirm Judge Jackson. Conservative and moderate and liberal judges all want us to confirm Judge Jackson. And I thank my colleagues in this chamber who worked in good faith to make sure the Senate can finish its work today. Finally, as I've said many times, the judge belongs on the Supreme Court. By that, I mean something very specific. In our nation's history, 115 individuals have been confirmed by this body to serve on the Supreme Court of the United States. Of those, 108 have been white men. Only 4 have been women. Only 2 have been African American. But Ketanji Brown Jackson will be the first African American woman ever to hold the title of justice. Think about the impact that will have on our democracy. Untold millions of kids will open textbooks and see pictures of Justice Jackson among the highest ranks of our public figures. How many millions of kids in generations past could have benefited from such a role model? How many would-be justices, lawyers, doctors, generals, business people have been lost to history precisely because their history books had few, if any, role models that they could relate to? We certainly have a long way to go on the road to true justice, but by confirming Judge Jackson today, we are taking a bold step forward towards reaching the full realization of our country's promise. We will make it far more likely that girls across America will feel precisely what Judge Jackson felt herself when she was a kid. Nobody can stop me. I can do this too. I am brilliant too. I belong too. For all these reasons, increasing the diversity of the court has been one of my highest priorities and one of the highest priorities of our Senate Democratic majority, of whom I am so proud. Justice Jackson is the most important example, but we've been working on this for over a year. Of the 58 Senate-confirmed federal judges since we took the majority, 3/4 have been women. 2/3 have been people of color. And it's not just racial and gender diversity that matters. We have strived to lift up judges that bring diversity through their experience. More public defenders in our courts, more civil rights lawyers, more election lawyers. When Americans of all walks of life come before the court, they should have confidence that those who don the robes have the ability to walk in their own shoes, to see and understand their side of the story, and then apply the law properly according to the facts. One judge at a time, one judge at a time. This majority is expanding the possibility of who merits consideration to the bench. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge my Republican colleagues who joined us on this occasion over the year to achieve this goal. In closing, I want to thank Chairman Durbin for beautifully executing this nomination process. It was equal parts fair, thorough, and expeditious. No easy feat in this modern Senate.
We
I want
joined
to
by
thank all of
attorney
my
Robert
Democratic
Tarver
colleagues
from
on the
Tarver Law
Judiciary
Firm in New
Committee. You were
Jersey.
just fabulous.
Hey, Robert,
Every one of you. For your
you're listening
respectful
to
and
the
insightful
Senate Majority
examination of the
Leader
judge's record.
Chuck Schumer from New
And I want
York
to thank my Republican
talk about
colleagues
this
who
historic
showed
moment that's about to happen.
seriously, no matter which side you voted on. The president
It's
sent us
very
an
interesting that
impressive
he's
nominee.
able to put this
He
into
merited a
perspective.
robust,
You know, so much has
thoughtful,
gone
and
on
balanced
thus far,
examination.
this back and forth, the
I
bickering,
thank the members
the
who did
pettiness and everything else
precisely
like that.
that.
But this is a moment that all Americans should
Short,
really
Madam
celebrate,
President,
because this is an American
this
moment,
is
because
one of the
she's an
greatest
American story.
in American
And that's
history.
what I think
At the
Chuck
time of our
Schumer is trying to
Constitution's ratification,
get across to
in
everyone,
most
that this,
states,
this
it was
moment is
the
larger
white,
than a
male,
partisan moment.
Protestant
This is a
landowner
significant moment in the
who
history of the
considered
United
part
States,
of
that
America
some
the
two,
South.
300 years,
So from the
almost
get-go,
300 years post-slavery,
generations of
you now have
Americans
someone who has
helped
ascended
to
to the highest court
establish
of the
the
land, who
United
will
States
set
as
the
a great
policy and
democracy.
precedent in law
We fought
for
a
this
bloody
land that
civil
we
war
call
to end
America.
slavery.
Yeah, and
We fought
we
for
heard
our
earlier
equality,
the
civil
chairman
rights,
of the
we
committee,
fought
Dick
against
Durbin, talk about going back to slavery, right? And Chuck Schumer's talking about the fact that there's never been a black woman on the court. There's only been two black men on the court. Diversity does matter, right, Tarver?
Oh, clearly it matters. Clearly it matters. And, you know, I've heard, I was watching one unnamed right-wing network talked about there's too much talk about slavery and too much talk about the history. But quite frankly, there's not enough talk about the history, because the fact of the matter is that there are groups in this country who will not allow you to forget their mistreatment. We have to be the same way, because it's only that way we recognize how far we
The
have come.
question occurs on the nomination of
Here we are.
Ketanji Brown Jackson of the District of Columbia to be an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States.
I ask for the yeas and nays.
Is, is there a sufficient second? There is, and certainly appears to be a sufficient second. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms.
Here we
Baldwin.
go.
Ms. Baldwin, aye. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Barrasso, no. Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bennett, aye. Mrs. Blackburn. Mrs. Blackburn, no. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blumenthal, aye. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Blunt, no. Mr. Booker. Mr. Booker, aye. Mr. Bozeman.
Cory Booker made sure you heard
Bozeman,
his yes.
no. Mr. Braun. Mr. Braun, no. Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown, aye. Mr. Burr. Mr. Burr, no. Ms. Cantwell. Ms. Cantwell, aye. Mrs. Capito. Mrs. Capito, no. Mr. Cardin. Mr. Cardin, aye. Mr. Carper. Mr. Carper, aye. Mr. Casey. Mr. Casey, aye. Mr. Cassidy. Mr. Cassidy, no. Ms. Collins. Ms. Collins, aye. Mr. Coons. Mr. Coons, aye. Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Cornyn, no. Ms. Cortez Masto. Ms. Cortez Masto, aye. Mr. Cotton. Mr. Cotton, no. Mr. Kramer. Mr. Kramer, no. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Crapo, no. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Cruz, no. Mr. Daines. Mr. Daines, no. Ms. Duckworth. Ms. Duckworth, aye. Mr. Durbin. Mr. Durbin, aye. Ms. Ernst. Ms. Ernst, no. Mrs. Feinstein. Mrs. Feinstein, aye. Mrs. Fisher. Mrs. Fisher, no. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mrs. Gillibrand, aye. Mr. Graham. Mr. Grassley. Mr. Grassley, no. Mr. Haggerty. Mr. Haggerty, no. Ms. Hassan. Ms. Hassan, aye. Mr. Hawley. Mr. Hawley, no. Mr. Heinrich. Mr. Heinrich, aye. Mr. Hickenlooper. Mr. Hickenlooper, aye. Ms. Hirono. Ms. Hirono, aye. Mr. Hoven. Mr. Hoven, no. Mrs. Hyde Smith. Mrs. Hyde Smith, no. Mr. Inhofe. Mr. Inhofe, no. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson, no. Mr. Kane. Mr. Kane, aye. Mr. Kelly. Mr. Kelly, aye. Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Kennedy, no. Mr. King. Mr. King,
We see some of the
aye.
senators
Ms.
getting out of their
Klobuchar.
seats to
Ms.
say aye
Klobuchar,
or nay or
aye.
yes or
Mr.
no,
Langford,
really
Mr.
reaffirming
Langford,
their positions.
no. Mr. Leahy. Mr. Leahy, aye. Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee, no. Mr. Lujan. Mr. Lujan, aye. Ms. Lummis. Ms. Lummis, no. Mr. Manchin. Mr. Manchin, aye. Mr. Markey. Mr. Markey, aye. Mr. Marshall. Mr. Marshall, no. Mr.
And they're
McConnell.
going in alphabetical order,
Mr.
if you noticed, and
McConnell,
so
no.
waiting for them to get
Mr.
to Tim
Menendez.
Scott.
Mr. Menendez,
Take note also of the fact that
aye.
Lindsey
Mr.
Graham
Merkley.
passed.
Yeah,
Mr.
yeah. How
Merkley,
about that?
aye. Mr. Moran. Mr. Moran
Cheryl
voted
Smith
in the
writes in
negative.
that
Ms.
it's time to say
Murkowski.
no to the no voters. But
Ms.
yeah,
Murkowski,
I caught that
aye. Mr.
Attorney
Murphy.
Tarver,
Mr. Murphy,
Lindsey Graham
aye.
passed on
Mrs. Murray.
voting.
I'm sorry.
Murray,
Lindsey Graham did
aye.
pass.
Mr.
Yeah,
Ossoff.
yeah, and that's a political move.
Mr. Ossoff, aye. Mr. Padilla. Mr. Padilla, aye. Mr. Paul. Mr. Peters. Mr. Peters, aye. Mr. Portman. Mr. Portman, no. Mr. Reed. Mr. Reed, aye.
Getting
Mr.
to Tim
Risch.
Scott in a couple of more
Mr. Risch,
moments.
no. Mr. Romney. Mr. Romney, aye. Ms. Rosen.
I predict that Graham will vote
Ms.
aye.
Rosen, aye. Mr. Rounds. Mr. Rounds, no. Mr. Rubio. Mr. Rubio, no. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Sanders, aye. Mr. Sass. Mr. Sass, no. Mr. Schatz. Mr. Schatz, aye. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Schumer, aye. Mr. Scott of Florida. Mr. Scott of Florida, no. Mr. Scott of South Carolina. Mr. Scott of South Carolina, no. Mrs. Shaheen. Mrs.
As
Shaheen,
David Youngblood said,
aye.
we knew
Mr. Shelby.
Uncle Tim,
Mr.
Uncle
Shelby,
Tim would vote no.
Ms. Cinema. Ms. Cinema,
And there's
aye. Ms. Smith.
Senator Kirsten Sinema
Ms.
of
Smith,
Arizona with a
aye.
yes
Ms.
vote.
Stabenow. Ms. Stabenow, aye. Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan, no. Mr. Tester. Mr. Tester, aye. Mr. Thune. Mr. Thune, no. Mr. Tillis. Mr. Tillis, no. Mr. Toomey. Mr. Toomey, no. Mr. Tuberville. Mr. Tuberville, no. Mr. Van Hollen. Mr. Van Hollen, aye. Mr. Warner. Mr. Warner, aye. Mr. Warnock. Mr. Warnock, aye. Ms. Warren.
Senator
Ms.
Raphael
Warren,
Warnock with a yes vote,
aye.
of
Mr.
course.
Whitehouse. Mr. Whitehouse, aye. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wicker, no. Mr. Wyden. Mr. Wyden, aye. Mr. Young. Mr. Young, no. Mr. Graham. Mr. Graham, no.
Okay, there you go. And now the tally.
Yeah, the official announcement. But I think it's significant for us to take a look at what Mr. Graham did, and I'll tell you why. Because it's kind of the ultimate act of cowardice. Depending on who was going to affirm, his vote would have depended on that. So he had no principled position.
Right. That's a great point, obviously, Attorney Tarver. And you know, by contrast, did you see the pride but some nervousness from the vice president there at the beginning?
I did.
And this part of it always is interesting to me as they scramble around just to make sure that this is more of making sure that things are done legally, right?
Yeah. This is nothing more than just pro forma rambling. But we already know that the vote has been taken. It's been public, and it's clear that she is going to be an Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court at this point. And, you know, what is interesting is Lindsey Graham has always thought himself to be a student of history. And this is one of those moments when history will look back and determine where you stood, which is why I thought at one point he would be inclined, since he did have some Republican cover, to be able to vote in favor of this justice.
Right. Well, based on the position he's been taking the last couple of weeks, wouldn't it have been hard for him to come out with a yes?
He as of late, has become a chameleon. You know, we've seen that with how he acted with Trump. Remember the condemnation early on, and then cozying up right after. The condemnation of what happened with January 6th, and then, you know, siding with them a little bit later. So, you know, he's been known to go back and forth. He's been known to change his spots, so to speak. So I thought for a moment that it might, I understand his base, but it could also be in some ways politically expedient for him to have made this vote, to the extent that he initially supported another African-American woman.
Yeah, here's a couple of notes from Lauren Burke, who's actually there. She says that Rand Paul is missing. Senator Tim Scott left the room immediately. He was one of the first to exit. Lindsey Graham voted from the back cloakroom, sticking his arm out, signaling thumbs down. That's from the Senate floor there. Lauren Burke is there. And that's really interesting that and it puts some more things in context there with Lindsey Graham, right? And Tim Scott being the first to leave. The first to leave. I mean, what is that about, Attorney Tarver?
You know, it's perplexing because, again, when you look at what happened here and you look at the moment, there is a time for people of color, no matter what party, no matter what your political affiliation, to move the ball forward. Because the fact of the matter is the outcome was never in doubt as long as the vice president stood in the wings to be able to vote. So they could have taken a vote for history, a vote for their ancestors, a vote for the future of African Americans, a vote to put the history, the dark history of America behind us. But they chose otherwise. And at this historic moment, history is going to judge those who looked at partisan ability as opposed to historical context.
Yeah, Lauren Burke again points out that we're only waiting for Vice President Kamala Harris to affirm this vote before it becomes official. And then we will, as you said earlier, have a new Associate Justice for the U.S. Supreme Court, and it will be none other than a Black woman. And Denise Rolock Barnes of the Washington Informer writes in that it's a proud moment for Black America and those who stand with us.
It absolutely is. And I can tell you, as a member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, a member of the profession, I'm extremely proud, to be able to see this moment, to have lived in this moment. We've lived in some extraordinary times, and this is just another one of those milestones of the extraordinary times. We may not see it again in our lifetime, but I will tell you this. You have a woman who is going to the United States Supreme Court who is eminently qualified, perhaps more qualified than the last 3 picks that have been made to this United States Supreme Court. And I know that she will represent people of color very well.
Yeah, and David Youngblood writes in that it's a wonderful day in Black America, in our own voice. The National Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda President and CEO Marcella Howell just texted that today we celebrate the confirmation of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson as a historic first. Black women and girls across the country and around the world are rejoicing as our latest trailblazer, U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson has crashed another glass ceiling. So even though it's not official, the statements are coming in, Attorney Tarver.
Yeah.
You've already proclaimed it about 10 minutes ago.
I did. And from a historical perspective, the other thing is this. In this country, many of us have lost the ability to understand how important it is for there to be representative individuals in these types of areas. I always say to people who can't see that, just think of a world wherein you're not represented anywhere and how you would feel. The fact of the matter is that we've never had someone who was a Black female to be in this position. And exactly. This is really just something that's putting Black females on the map. This was always said to be the year of the Black woman. I believe almost every year is the year of the Black woman, but this particularly was said to be. and these developments are showing it.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been bringing you live from the floor of the Senate, the confirmation of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, the vote. We are just waiting now for the official announcement. It looks like it's about 1 minute and 5 seconds away from Vice President Kamala Harris making this official, that we will have a new Supreme Court justice. It's still going to be 6-3, Tarver. We talked about this before, but there's still great significance in having, not just symbolically, but in actuality, it's going to be interesting to have her voice on that court.
Yeah, what's going to be important. 6-3 in most cases. But the fact of the matter is you have someone going to the Supreme Court that is a very, very polished writer. And the writers in these opinions, whether or not she's on the winning side or even the losing side, gets to write the dissenting opinion if the Chief Justice selects. And that dissenting opinion can often be the opinion that sways other justices or other cases as you move forward. So don't underestimate the importance of having her there, even on the 6-3 downside, on the 3-member downside.
Yeah, let's go back to the floor. It looks like the time has expired on the clock there. So any second now, we should have official confirmation here. As we see,
I do just want to point out what a disrespect it would have been to have voted from a closet, as you indicated that senator did. A thumbs down from the closet.
That's horrible. Lindsey Graham from South Carolina, the Republican from South Carolina. It is as horrible as you can get. It's bad enough the way they treated her during this process. I mean, if you're gonna say no, man up. Just be there and say no. Yeah. So Attorney Tarver too. It's not it seems like it's no longer about right and wrong. It's only about what side of the aisle you're on.
Yeah, clearly we have descended into full partisan activity. That's it. And so the fact that these moments would normally be celebrated, it actually has turned into a moment of disgust for those who have voted against the first black woman. And I don't see a way, Stacey. Unfortunately, I don't see a way of us moving anywhere away from that anytime soon, because that's what
Well,
we've descended to, and there's no movement on the part of particularly on the part of the Republicans.
yeah, and we heard Mitch McConnell talk about stacking the courts. Once again, that is rhetoric in the sense that President Biden has been asked many times about adding to the Supreme Court, and he's consistently just shooed that thought away.
But you know what?
This
He would be justified if he did. Don't forget how we got to 6-3. We got to 6-3 by the unfairness, the disingenuous actions, the dishonesty of Mitch McConnell and the Republicans in moving forward those last two justices. That's
and
how
not
we got here.
yeah, and not allowing for Barack Obama's pick at all.
Yeah.
That was, and then to turn around, Amy Coney Barrett wasn't she was just before the election.
Yes, exactly.
It was
That's
only
what I'm
a
saying.
week or so away.
So the difference has been Republicans have always been really good at messaging. You have to give them that. They're really good at messaging and keeping on messages. Democrats have never been able to find their voice in terms of these things. And I think I've likened it before to the fact of, the Democrats playing 1940s basketball and the Republicans basically playing, a 2020 game. It's apples and oranges, but it's the same game. They haven't realized that the game has changed.
Well, David Youngblood, again, I'm going to go back to him because he said we should absolutely expand the court. What's the upside and the downside of that, Attorney Tarver?
The upside is that you have a larger number proportionately to move forward with, and you're going to get, hopefully, you would hope to get a more fair distribution. You get out of the 6-3 rut, which quite frankly is likely to follow us for our lifetime, and get to a point where you can get some fairness. And why it would be justified is simply because of the way that the last two picks came to fruition with the unfair, disingenuous, and dishonest actions of the Republican Party and Mitch McConnell. The downside is that there really is a question of, I guess, where you stop with that. There's no mandate that says what the component has to be on the United States Supreme Court. So, if one side does it here, then perhaps another side does it later on. It can also be seen in a number of ways as being unfair, that you took a judicial process and turned it into a political process just by putting other people on to get a political outcome. Either way, there's going to be some condemnation. But the fact of the matter is, it's probably warranted given the fact that we got to 6-3 through disingenuous methods.
Yeah, and I tell you what, if the Republicans retake the White House in 2024, and certainly if they take the Senate and then take the White House, I should say, can you see them expanding it? I can see them expanding it.
I can't see them expanding it because I can't see the need for it. Look, they're in the catbird seat right now. As of right now, what they have done is they've cemented the future of this court with young picks. And aside from that, what they've also done is they have engaged in strict gerrymandering and putting into effect election regulations that they believe will help them win elections from here forward. And so, in a number of ways, they've been able to establish a system whereby they believe they're not even going to have significant contests going forward.
Yeah. It just seems that when they decide to double down on something, they really do. And when they decide that they don't want the Democrats doing something, they do it in a way that's extremely more significant, extravagant, or profound, if you will.
It's almost like the old Charlie Brown and Lucy thing, the Democrats are Charlie Brown and the Republicans are Lucy. And no, we're not going to do this or whatever. And they play the game they want to play it. in the way they want to play it. But, Charlie Brown always tries to take the honest tack. The game has changed, and it's time for a reality check on the part of, I think, all the parties here, that you're either all going to engage in this kind of rush to the bottom, or you're all going to step your game up and move toward a more honest mode of behavior. And I think we're unfortunately engaged to this rush to the bottom.
Yeah, we see the vice president has been engaged in a somewhat spirited conversation with, I'm not sure who that is. I don't want to say she's the interpreter, but she appeared, I thought I saw her interpreting earlier, but it could be someone else. So if that someone else happens to come across our program and hears that, it's simply because I was not able to identify you. If you're not an interpreter, then I apologize. If you are an interpreter, then hey, I got it right. But they seem to be having a very spirited conversation. I see also the Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer. He had been talking to a group, and now he's moved over to talk to another group, giving somebody a fist bump. That looks like Dick Durbin. He gave a fist bump to, as if to say, we got it.
Well, Durbin deserves a lot of credit. I've said this before on your program. The one senator who has been at the forefront of moving forward Black people in positions of confirmation to the federal courts has been Dick Durbin. And Dick Durbin really marshaled this effort with Ketanji Brown Jackson. I think he handled it masterfully. He was also engaged in a lot of protection for her. I mean, we would have wanted, I think, a lot of us, for there to be a more direct attack on
Mr. Paul, no.
Okay, so they got Rand Paul's vote, and there is Lauren Burke joining us from the Capitol.
Hey, how are you guys doing?
Lauren, a lot's going on over there.
Yeah, I've been waiting for Rand Paul. He's here. Everybody has seen him.
They just announced that he's a no.
Good. Yeah, everybody knows he's a no, but got to hear Kamala Harris do the call.
Yeah. Well, that kind of clears her to do the call now, right?
Yeah, she should be doing it any second. There we go.
And here we go. And Lauren got on her serious hat today.
Absolutely. There's a moment out in the hallway. I'm right outside the Senate chamber, and there's going to be a moment.
There's that moment, huh?
The A's are 53.
There's a moment out in the hallway.
The Nays are 47.
There's a moment out in the hallway where.
And there it is. 2:18 p.m. April the 7th, 2022. History at the U.S. Capitol. History in the U.S. Supreme Court. Ketanji Brown Jackson is now an Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court. Lauren, you're there. We hear the applause from here, but I'm sure the building seems to be shaking.
Yeah, you can hear the applause, and I'm going to break off here because all the CBC members are about to come out of the chamber, and there's going to be a little press conference.
Okay,
so I want to get some video of that, and then I'll check back in with you.
Thanks so much. That's Lauren Burke, the NNPA's Capitol Hill journalist at her best. Tarver, the history is now made.
Yeah,
2:17 p.m.
The only thing that's left is just the swearing in at this point. But
under the previous order,
there's the vice.
the motion to reconsider is considered made and laid upon the table, and the president will immediately be notified of the Senate's action.
Madam President, very happily, I note the absence of a quorum.
So that is
the clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.
So, Attorney Tarver, that's it.
Yeah. It's interesting. I guess someone must have made the motion because you can't get a reconsideration on the floor unless there's a motion for reconsideration. So someone must have made that motion for reconsideration, which of course is in bad taste at this time.
Yeah. Well, what else?
Knowing where we stood.
As
You're
Willie
right.
Thompson writes in, now it is written.
Yeah, right. Why should anything be any different? We've been dealing with bad taste since the inception of her proposed appointment. So why would they do anything different? But I'll tell you what is really interesting here. what's really interesting is that Judge Jackson has the opportunity now to really showcase, I think, Black womanhood and issues that are important to Black women on this court. There are some issues that are germane to Black women. Black women, as we know, are paid less than all other groups together statistically. And the struggles of Black womanhood are very clear. So she's going to have a chance to weigh into that. She is a Black woman. She is a daughter. She is a mother. And I think her perspective is going to be well received.
Yeah, and this from the David Johns, the executive director of the National Black Justice Coalition. He says, we celebrate Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson in a historic bipartisan confirmation vote that finally put a deserving and experienced Black woman on the nation's highest court. With her appointment to the bench, Justice Jackson shatters the too high glass ceiling Black women have long bumped up against in the judicial branch of government and elsewhere. So again, that is from David Johns, the executive director of the National Black Justice Coalition. There'll be statements and comments and all day long, all next week as well.
Sure.
Lauren Burke is attending. She says she's about to attend the press conference by the CBC. I know that the Senate leaders, led by Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, will have a press conference shortly as well. So then ultimately we'll hear from Judge Jackson. Attorney Tarver, what do you expect her to say?
I expect her to be, I expect her to be brief first and foremost, because we heard a lot from her before. I expect her to be conciliatory. I expect her to recognize her family, to show the family person that she is. And I expect her to just want to get to work. We want to, I think all of us who have seen the absurdities in this process are really ready to put this behind us and to move forward with this new justice. This is a dark spot in our history when you're talking about how she was treated. She was treated unfairly. It was just horrible. But now it's time to move forward. She's gotten to where she needs to get to, and we can all be proud of that.
Yeah, I got a message from Wade Henderson, who is the interim president and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. He says, the nation rejoices today at the confirmation of Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, our next Associate Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. Justice Jackson is immensely qualified, and our coalition is thrilled to finally see the first Black woman serve on our nation's highest court. By any standard, Justice Jackson is more than ready for this role. So that's from Wade Henderson, the CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. You can't question her qualifications, Attorney Tarver, right?
You absolutely can't. And it was absurd to have those members of the Senate who knew about her background, and not just her educational background, because you had Cruz and others who had been to Harvard, and quite frankly, there's a lot of talk about Harvard. In a number of ways, it's overrated with things. Hey, I taught at Harvard for 19 years of trial advocacy, and there are good students there. There are great students there, but there are good and great students everywhere. But the fact of the matter is, this woman was so far heads above every other justice that had come forward in the last few appointments that it didn't even make sense to question her qualification. So it had to be something else. And, look, I think we're pretty clear as to what it was. It was both partisan behavior as well as race. But fortunately, we got past that. Fortunately, we've gotten past that. And she is now going to sit in the highest court of the land.
I'm so glad to hear an accomplished attorney like yourself say that Harvard can be overrated, because to me, it's tantamount to hearing a great musician say the Beatles are overrated, which I'm 100% in that school of thought. So, Attorney Tarver, you have once again made my day.
Well, look, we know that there are people who are in Harvard because of merit. We know there are legacies. We know that there are all different people in all different people in all different schools, the way they got there. But the fact of the matter is, it is not the school that makes the person. It is the person that comes out of the school and how they conduct themselves after they have attained the knowledge that they got from that institution. And some people who came out of Harvard act as if they never came out of any school at all. That's what we've seen in our United States Senate.
Yes, indeed. Attorney Robert Tarver, we know with such short notice for you, Tarver, we know you are very busy, so we certainly appreciate you stopping by this afternoon. We look forward to carrying on this conversation. We have a special on Monday on Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson and the history of the court, Black men, Thurgood Marshall and Clarence Thomas on the court. We're going to discuss all that and more Monday morning. We hope that Attorney Tarver, the great legal mind that he is, will join us for that discussion as well. So thank you so much, Attorney Tarver.
You may not want me for a discussion with Clarence Thomas. We've already had that discussion.
We love it.
I will gladly be there.
Well, drive carefully, Attorney Tarver. We can't afford to be without you. Thank you all for tuning in to this special Let It Be Known. Everybody have a great afternoon.